What if your church wedding was a lie, because your dead father sold your name to a stranger with a mountain and a contract? Married on Sunday, sold by Thursday. The courthouse bells struck 10 as Mercy Caldwell stood at the window of Baxter's General Store, watching her stepbrother's wagon disappear up the mountain trail. She pressed her marriage papers against the glass, the official seal catching the morning light. "Miss Caldwell? Miss Seuss?" Baxter approached from behind the counter, her voice careful. "Augustus left word you'd be needing supplies." Mercy turned from the window. "What manner of supplies?" "For the journey up to Thornfield's place." Mrs. Baxter's eyes flicked to the papers in Mercy's hands. "Said you'd be staying a spell." The license crackled in Mercy's fist as she tightened her grip. 3 days ago she'd signed these papers with Thomas Whitmore, the banker's son. Today, Augustus claimed urgent business required her immediate departure to the mountains. She knew this was no coincidence. "I never agreed to any journey," she said. Mrs. Baxter reached beneath the counter and produced a small wooden box, its lid worn smooth. "Your stepbrother paid for provisions and left this. Said it contained everything you'd need to understand." Mercy accepted the box, feeling its weight. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a silver locket and a folded letter bearing her father's handwriting. Her hands shook as she read. "If you are reading this, Augustus has honored our agreement. The mountain man Thornfield holds a debt against our family name. Only marriage to him will clear it. Your union with young Whitmore cannot stand. This is impossible." Mercy sank into the chair beside the pot-bellied stove. "Father died 2 years past." "Thornfield came down last month, Mrs." Baxter said quietly. "Showed papers at the courthouse. Legal documents about mining claims and family debts. Judge Hawkins said everything appeared in order." Through the window, Mercy watched a dust devil spiral across the main street. 3 women emerged from the millinery shop, their heads bent together in whispered conversation. They glanced toward the store, then away. What are they whispering? That Thornfield sent word he expects his bride within the week. Mrs. Baxter folded her hands. That Augustus struck a bargain to satisfy old debts. Mercy stood, the wooden box tucked against her ribs. "And what of my legal marriage to Thomas?" "Judge says mountain law holds precedence in matters of family debt." Mrs. Baxter's voice dropped. "I'm sorry, child." The bell above the door chimed as Thomas Whitmore entered, his banker's coat pristine despite the morning dust. He stopped when he saw Mercy, his expression shifting from relief to confusion. "Thank God you're safe. I've been searching since dawn." He approached, hands extended. "People are saying the strangest things about contracts and mountain marriages." Mercy held up her father's letter. "Read this." Thomas scanned the page, his face growing pale. "This cannot be legal. We were married 3 days ago by proper ceremony. Augustus says otherwise." Mercy moved to the window again. "Says father promised me to this mountain man before his death." "Thornfield's word carries weight in these parts," Mrs. Baxter said. "He provides meat to half the families in winter, protects the mining roads from bandits." Thomas straightened his shoulders. "I'll speak with Judge Hawkins immediately. No mountain hermit can dissolve a legal marriage." "You'd best hurry," Mrs. Baxter said. "Augustus left word he'd return by noon to escort Miss Caldwell up the trail." Mercy watched Thomas stride toward the courthouse, his boots raising small clouds with each step. The wooden box felt heavier in her hands, and she found herself staring at the silver locket inside. Her mother's locket, which had disappeared after the funeral. The courthouse clock began to strike 11 as she made her choice. The noon sun blazed overhead when Augustus returned, his wagon loaded with canvas and rope. Mercy waited on the mercantile porch, her travelling bag at her feet, and her father's letter folded in her pocket. "Ready yourself," Augustus called without dismounting. "Thornfield expects us before nightfall." "I've spoken with Thomas," Mercy said. "He's filing papers with the territorial court." Augustus spat into the dust. Territorial court holds no sway over mountain contracts. He gestured toward the box in her hands. "You read father's letter?" "I read his words. I question his reasoning. Question all you like on the trail." Augustus stepped down and hefted her bag into the wagon bed. "But you'll ride with me now, willing or not. By noon The sun pressed down hard as the wagon rolled through town. Mercy noticed how conversations stopped when they passed, how curtains twitched at windows. At the schoolhouse, children paused their games to stare. "What exactly did Father owe this man?" she asked. Thornfield grub-staked Father's first mining claim. When the silver played out, Father couldn't repay the debt. Augustus flicked the reins. Thornfield agreed to wait, provided Father pledge his daughter as surety. "I was 14 years old. You were old enough to bind a contract according to mining law." The trail began to climb, winding between stands of aspen that flickered gold in the mountain air. Mercy felt the marriage papers crinkle in her pocket as the wagon jolted over stones. "And what do you gain from honoring this arrangement?" Augustus was quiet for several minutes. Finally, "Thornfield owns water rights to the creek that runs through our property. Without his permission, I cannot work Father's remaining claims. So you trade me for mining rights. I honor Father's word. Nothing more." They stopped at a way station where a weathered sign read Thornfield Creek, 8 miles. Augustus watered the horses while Mercy examined the wooden box more carefully. Beneath the locket she found a second item wrapped in cloth, a small glass vial filled with gold dust. "Payment on account," Augustus said, noticing her discovery. "Thornfield sent it as proof of good faith." Mercy held the vial to the light. "How much is this worth?" $50? Maybe 60? She returned it to the box, her mind working. The stagecoach fare to Denver cost $12. Train passage to San Francisco, another 30. The remaining gold would provide a modest start in a new city. "What if I simply leave?" she asked. "Take the evening stage and disappear. Then Thornfield will come to town looking for what's owed. Augustus climbed back onto the wagon seat, and he won't be asking politely." The trail narrowed as they climbed higher, forcing them into single file behind a pack train hauling supplies to the mining camps. Mercy counted 7 mules loaded with flour, beans, and mining tools. The lead driver tipped his hat as they passed. "Afternoon, Miss Caldwell. Word is you're finally meeting your mountain man." "News runs fast here," she said. "Thornfield's been preparing for weeks. Built himself a proper cabin, cleared land for a garden. Man's serious about settling down." As they crested a ridge, Mercy saw smoke rising from a cluster of buildings ahead. The settlement consisted of a dozen structures scattered along the creek, a mill, a blacksmith shop, and several cabins. "Is this where he lives?" "This is where he trades," Augustus said. "His cabin sits another mile up the mountain." They stopped at the mill, where a bearded man emerged, wiping his hands on a leather apron. "Frank Thornfield, meet your intended bride." Mercy studied the mountain man as he approached. He stood tall and broad-shouldered, his beard neatly trimmed despite his wilderness surroundings. His cabin, visible through the trees, appeared well built and maintained. "Miss Caldwell," Thornfield removed his hat. "I trust your journey proved comfortable." "Comfortable enough." She remained in the wagon seat, though I confess some confusion about the circumstances. Thornfield glanced at Augustus. "Your stepbrother explained the situation?" "He explained your version of it." The mountain man smiled. "Perhaps we should discuss this properly. Will you walk with me?" Mercy accepted his offered hand and stepped down from the wagon. As they moved toward the creek, she noticed how other people in the settlement watched with interest, but maintained respectful distance. "Your father was a good man," Thornfield said. "When his mining venture failed, I could have seized his property immediately. Instead, I accepted his promise of future payment, in the form of his daughter, in the form of a partnership. Marriage creates legal bonds that protect both parties." He stopped beside the creek and picked up a smooth stone. "I've built a life here, Miss Caldwell. I need a wife who understands mountain ways, and I need a choice in my own future." Thornfield skipped the stone across the water. "Your father gave you that choice when he made his agreement. You can honor it willingly, or I can enforce it through territorial law." The water gurgled over rocks as Mercy considered. The settlement bustled with afternoon activity, men loading wagons, women hanging laundry, children playing near the mill wheel. It appeared prosperous and peaceful. What exactly would this marriage entail? A legal ceremony, proper papers filed with the territorial court. You'd help manage the household and trading post. I'd provide protection and comfort. And if I refuse? Then I'll collect my debt through other means. His voice remained calm. Your stepbrother's mining claims, for instance. Mercy opened the wooden box and removed the gold vial. This is partial payment? A token of good faith. The full debt amounts to considerably more. She walked to the creek's edge and poured the gold dust into her palm, watching it catch the afternoon light. $50 worth of freedom, or the beginning of a bargain she didn't fully understand. Behind them, Augustus called out, "Time to decide, Mercy. Daylight's burning." The creek ran clear and cold over granite stones as Mercy knelt beside the water, the gold dust still cupped in her palm. She had dreamed of marriage as a choice freely made, not a debt to be satisfied. Yet, watching Thornfield's settlement, she saw purpose and community rather than the harsh isolation she'd expected. "May I ask you something?" she said. Thornfield crouched beside her. "Of course. Why did you wait 2 years to collect this debt? You could have claimed me immediately after Father's death." "Because a marriage built on desperation serves no one." He gestured toward the settlement. "I needed time to build something worth sharing. You needed time to understand your own mind." Mercy let the gold dust trickle back into the vial. "And you believe I understand it now? I believe you're old enough to see beyond what you've lost, to what you might gain." She studied his face, noting the calm intelligence in his eyes. "Show me your cabin." They walked up the mountain trail, leaving Augustus to water the horses. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by pine and aspen, its log walls chinked with mortar and its windows fitted with real glass. A vegetable garden flourished beside the front door. "I built this last winter," Thornfield said, pushing open the door. Every timber cut and shaped by hand. The interior impressed her with its order and comfort. A stone fireplace, shelves lined with books, furniture crafted from solid wood. A spinning wheel sat near the window, and bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters. "You were expecting a woman's touch," she observed. "I was hoping for a partnership." He opened a cabinet to reveal neat stacks of plates and cups. "I can provide for 2 people as easily as one. The question is whether you can see yourself building a life here." Mercy moved to the window and looked down the mountain toward town. The settlement lay spread below like a child's toy village, smoke rising from a dozen chimneys. "What happened to your first wife?" Thornfield was quiet for a moment. "I've never married. I came west to find something that couldn't be bought or inherited. This land, this life, I built it all myself." "Then why not find a wife the usual way? Court someone properly?" "Because the usual way brings women who want to change mountain life into something else." He joined her at the window. "Your father understood this place. He saw the value in its wildness. Father died trying to extract wealth from these mountains. He died trying to impose his will on them. There's a difference." The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting golden rectangles across the wooden floor. Mercy found herself imagining meals cooked at the stone fireplace, evenings spent reading by lamplight, mornings watching the sun rise over the peaks. "If I agreed to this arrangement," she said slowly, "what assurances would I have?" "Legal marriage papers, filed properly with the territorial court. Equal partnership in all business dealings. Protection from any who would harm you, and freedom to leave if I chose." Thornfield considered this. "After 1 full year, if you still wish to go, I wouldn't stop you." It wasn't the answer she'd hoped for, but it offered something her current situation didn't. Time to make a genuine choice rather than reacting to immediate pressure. She opened the wooden box and removed her mother's locket, fastening it around her neck. The silver felt warm against her skin, and she remembered her mother's words about making the best of circumstances beyond one's control. "I'll need to send word to Thomas," she said. "Of course. And I want the marriage ceremony performed in town, where people can witness it properly. If that's your preference." Mercy took a deep breath, tasting the thin mountain air. "Then I accept your proposal, Mr. Thornfield. with the understanding that this is a business partnership as much as a marriage." He extended his hand. "Agreed, Miss Caldwell." As they shook hands, Mercy felt the weight of her decision settle around her like her mother's locket, heavy with history, but worn by choice rather than force. The morning sun painted the courthouse steps gold when Mercy arrived in town 3 days later, her wedding dress carefully pressed and her mother's locket gleaming at her throat. Word of the ceremony had spread through the settlement, and a small crowd gathered in the street. Thomas Whitmore waited near the courthouse door, his face grave. "I've spoken with the territorial judge," he said. "The Mountain marriage contract appears legally binding." "I'm sorry, Thomas." Mercy touched his arm gently. "This isn't what either of us planned. You could still fight this. We could travel to Denver, appeal to higher courts. And what would that accomplish? Thornfield would still hold his debt against my family." Through the courthouse windows she could see Judge Hawkins preparing the marriage register. Thornfield stood beside Augustus, both men dressed in their finest clothes. The scene struck her as remarkably civilized for what she'd been told was mountain justice. "Miss Caldwell?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Patterson, the town's unofficial social coordinator. "I've brought flowers from my garden." Mercy accepted the bouquet of late summer roses, their scent carrying memories of her mother's garden. More townspeople approached. Mrs. Baxter with a wrapped gift, the telegraph operator with good wishes, several miners' wives offering congratulations. "You're being kind," she said. "Thornfield's been good to this community," Mrs. Patterson replied. "Shared his hunting success, helped with difficult births, settled disputes fairly. If he's chosen you, it speaks well of your character." The courthouse door opened, and Judge Hawkins appeared. "Ready for the ceremony?" Mercy nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her dress. The wooden box sat on the courthouse steps, containing her marriage papers to Thomas, now void, and her father's letter explaining the mountain contract. Inside the courthouse 24 people gathered as witnesses. Thornfield stepped forward, offering his arm. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly. "Having every thought possible," she replied. "But I gave my word." Judge Hawkins opened his book and began the familiar phrases. Mercy listened to every word, knowing this ceremony bound her to a life she had never imagined. When Thornfield slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, she noticed his hands were steady and warm. His voice remained calm as he spoke his vows, promising partnership and protection. "Do you, Mercy Caldwell, take this man as your lawful husband, to honor and cherish in sickness and health, for richer or poorer? Until death do you part?" The moment stretched like a held breath. Through the courthouse windows she could see the mountain peaks rising against the blue sky, wild and beautiful and unforgiving. "I do," she said. Judge Hawkins pronounced them married, and the witnesses applauded. Thornfield kissed her cheek with respectful gentleness, and Mrs. Patterson threw rose petals. As they signed the marriage register, Mercy noticed Thornfield's signature, strong, clear letters that matched the careful construction of his cabin and the ordered prosperity of his settlement. "Mrs. Thornfield," he said, testing the name. "I suppose I'll need time to grow accustomed to it." "We'll both need time to grow accustomed to many things." The reception took place at the town's hotel, where Mrs. Baxter had prepared a modest feast. Mercy found herself accepting congratulations from people who genuinely seemed pleased by the match. "Thornfield's been alone too long," confided Mrs. Peterson, the blacksmith's wife. "He needs someone to help him remember there's more to life than work and survival." As the afternoon wore on, Mercy realized she was learning things about her new husband that surprised her. He spoke knowledgeably about literature, discussed territorial politics with intelligence, and treated everyone regardless of their social position with equal respect. When a dispute arose between two miners over a boundary claim, Thornfield listened to both sides carefully before suggesting a compromise that satisfied everyone. Watching him, Mercy began to understand why the community trusted his judgment. As evening approached, Augustus prepared to return to his own claims. "You've made the right choice," he told Mercy privately. "Thornfield will provide well for you. I hope I can provide something worthwhile for him in return." The sun was setting behind the mountains when Thornfield helped her into his wagon for the journey back to the cabin. The wooden box sat between them, containing the artifacts of her former life, the marriage papers to Thomas, her father's letter, the now empty vial that had held gold dust. "What will you do with those?" Thornfield asked. Mercy considered. "Keep them as reminders, I suppose, of choices made and paths not taken. Regrets serve little purpose in mountain country," he said. "The weather changes too quickly, and the terrain demands complete attention." As they climbed the winding trail, Mercy felt the weight of her decision settling around her. She had married a stranger to satisfy a debt she hadn't incurred, leaving behind a man she had genuinely cared for. Yet, sitting beside Thornfield in the gathering darkness, she felt something she hadn't expected, curiosity about what their partnership might become. "Tell me about the books in your cabin," she said. "I noticed you had quite a collection. Reading helps pass the winter months. I've acquired volumes on everything from agriculture to philosophy. Do you have any poetry?" "Several collections." "Do you enjoy verse?" "My mother did. She taught me to appreciate the rhythm of language." They talked about books and ideas as the wagon rolled through the mountain darkness, and Mercy found herself genuinely engaged in conversation for the first time since receiving her father's letter. When they reached the cabin, she felt less like a debt being collected, and more like a partner arriving home. The first snow began falling as Mercy woke on her 7th morning as Mrs. Thornfield, each flake catching the lamplight like scattered diamonds. She had slept in the cabin's small back room, while Thornfield took the main room, their arrangement as carefully proper as their daytime conversations. Through the window she could see fresh tracks in the powder, deer, rabbit, and something larger she couldn't identify. The sight reminded her how completely she depended on her husband's knowledge for survival in this place. "Weather's turning," Thornfield said from the kitchen, where he was preparing coffee. "We should check the settlement before the trail becomes impassable." They rode down the mountain as the snow thickened, the flakes muffling sounds and transforming familiar landmarks into mysterious shapes. At the settlement they found unusual activity, men loading wagons, families securing shutters, children herded indoors. "What's happening?" Mercy asked. Frank Miller, who ran the general store, approached with obvious relief. "Thank God you're here, Thornfield. We've got trouble coming up the trail." "What kind of trouble?" "Strangers asking questions about you and your new wife. 3 men on horseback, well armed, claiming to represent territorial law." Mercy felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of questions?" "About the validity of mountain marriages, about whether proper legal procedures were followed." Miller glanced around nervously. "They showed papers from the territorial court in Denver." Thornfield's expression remained calm, but Mercy noticed his hand move instinctively toward the rifle secured to his saddle. "When did they arrive?" "This morning, just after dawn. They're staying at the hotel, making inquiries." "I should speak with them," Mercy said. Number Thornfield's voice carried quiet authority. "We'll handle this properly, through official channels." They made their way to the hotel, where a small crowd had gathered on the porch. Judge Hawkins stood near the door, his face troubled. "Thornfield," he called, "these gentlemen claim your marriage violated territorial statutes." 3 men emerged from the hotel, well-dressed, city, soft, with the confident bearing of those accustomed to having their authority unquestioned. The leader stepped forward. "Mr. Thornfield, I'm Deputy Marshal Collins from the Territorial Court. We need to discuss certain irregularities in your recent marriage ceremony." "What irregularities?" Collins produced a document from his coat. "This is a writ questioning the validity of marriages conducted under mining law when one party was already legally wed to another." Mercy's heart sank. Thomas had found a way to challenge the mountain marriage after all. "My wife was free to marry," Thornfield said. "All proper procedures were followed. According to our records, Miss Caldwell— excuse me, Mrs. Thornfield was legally married to Thomas Whitmore 3 days before your ceremony. That prior marriage was never formally dissolved." Judge Hawkins cleared his throat. "Marshal, I examined all documents carefully. The mountain contract predated the Whitmore marriage by 2 years. Territorial law recognizes marriages performed by licensed clergy with proper witnesses. it does not necessarily recognize contracts made under mining statutes. The crowd murmured uneasily. Mercy realized that her marriage and Thornfield's reputation hung in the balance of a legal technicality she didn't fully understand. "What exactly are you proposing?" Thornfield asked. "That Mrs. Thornfield return to Denver for a formal court hearing. If the marriage is ruled invalid, she'll be free to return to her previous husband. And if we refuse?" Collins smiled coldly. "Then we'll arrest her for bigamy and you for conspiracy to violate territorial marriage laws." The crowd fell silent. Mercy felt all eyes upon her, waiting to see how she would respond. The wooden box sat in their wagon, containing the documents that had brought her to this moment. She stepped forward. "Marshal Collins, may I see this writ?" Collins handed over the document. As Mercy read, she noticed several details that didn't align with what she knew of territorial law. "This writ is dated 6 days ago," she said, "but it references events from our wedding ceremony, which took place only 3 days ago. How could you know the specific details of our ceremony before it happened?" Collins's confident expression faltered slightly. "We received advance notice of your intentions." "From whom?" Thornfield moved to stand beside her. "Answer the lady's question, Marshal." "From parties with legitimate concern about the legal proceedings." Mercy felt pieces clicking into place. "You mean from Thomas Whitmore's father, the banker who stands to lose significant money if my family's debts are satisfied through marriage rather than foreclosure?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Several people nodded as they recognized the economic implications. "The source of our information is irrelevant," Collins said. "What matters is ensuring territorial law is properly followed." "Then let's follow it properly." Judge Hawkins stepped forward. "Marshal, do you have proper arrest warrants signed by a territorial judge?" Collins hesitated. "We have authority to detain individuals pending formal charges." "That's not the same thing." The judge turned to the crowd. "As the duly appointed legal authority in this district, I've examined all documents related to the Thornfield marriage. The ceremony was conducted properly under both territorial and mining law." "But the prior marriage," Collins began, "was invalid from the moment it was contracted," Judge Hawkins interrupted. "Miss Caldwell was already bound by legal promise to Mr. Thornfield. Her marriage to young Whitmore violated that existing contract." Mercy felt relief flood through her, followed immediately by understanding. "You knew this would happen," she said to Thornfield. "You knew Thomas would challenge the marriage." "I suspected it," he admitted. "That's why I insisted on a public ceremony with proper witnesses, and why I filed complete documentation with the territorial court the same day." Collins looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Nevertheless, we have our orders. Your orders came from private parties, not territorial authorities." Judge Hawkins's voice carried finality. "And in this district I represent territorial law." The crowd began to shift, their mood changing from uncertainty to support. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward. "Frank Thornfield has served this community faithfully for 5 years. If he says his marriage is legal, that's good enough for us." Others nodded agreement. Miller added, "These men rode up here making accusations without proper warrants. That's not how territorial law works." Mercy realized this moment would define not just her marriage, but her place in the community. She opened the wooden box and removed her father's letter. "Marshal Collins," she said clearly, "this letter documents the original contract between my father and my husband. It predates any other marriage by 2 years. If you question its validity, I invite you to examine it through proper legal channels in territorial court, with proper representation for both parties." She handed the letter to Judge Hawkins. "Until such time as a higher court rules otherwise, I am legally married to Frank Thornfield, and I intend to honor that commitment." The crowd applauded. Collins realized he had lost both legal ground and popular support. "This matter isn't finished," he said. "No," Thornfield replied, "but it's finished here today. If you have legitimate legal business, conduct it through proper channels. If you don't, I suggest you leave before the weather makes travel impossible." As if summoned by his words, The snow began falling more heavily. Collins and his men retreated to their horses, clearly unwilling to be trapped in a hostile mountain community by winter weather. As they rode away, the crowd dispersed with obvious relief. Mercy found herself standing beside her husband, watching the strangers disappear down the trail. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For being prepared. For protecting our marriage before I even knew it needed protecting." Thornfield smiled, the first truly warm expression she'd seen from him. "We're partners now, Mercy. Protecting each other is part of the bargain." As they rode back to the cabin through the falling snow, Mercy realized something had changed. She no longer felt like a debt being collected or a convenience being arranged. She felt like a woman who had chosen her path and defended it publicly. That night, as they sat by the fireplace reading, she with a volume of poetry, he with a treatise on agriculture, she found herself stealing glances at this man who had become her husband. Not through force or manipulation, but through circumstances that had revealed both their characters under pressure. "Frank?" she said, using his first name for the first time. "Yes, I'm glad I married you." He looked up from his book, and she saw genuine warmth in his eyes. "I'm glad you chose to stay married to me." Outside, the snow continued falling, blanketing the mountain in pristine white. Inside the cabin, two people who had been strangers a week before began the slow, careful work of building a life together. Spring returned to the mountains with rushing water and new green, and Mercy Thornfield stood in her garden watching the creek run high with snowmelt. 6 months of marriage had taught her the rhythm of mountain seasons and the satisfaction of partnership built on mutual respect. The wooden box sat on the kitchen table, its contents transformed by time and understanding. Her father's letter remained, but she now read it as the desperate act of a failing man rather than a binding decree. Her marriage papers to Thomas had been replaced by the deed to 40 acres of mountain land, filed jointly in her name and Frank's. "Letter came up from town," Frank said, entering with the mail. "From Thomas Whitmore." Mercy accepted the envelope with calm curiosity. Inside she found a brief note of congratulation on her marriage and news of Thomas's engagement to a banker's daughter from Denver. "He wishes us well," she said, "and he's found someone more suitable to his circumstances." "Regrets?" Mercy considered the question while watching a hawk circle overhead. "None worth keeping." They had built something genuine together, not the passionate romance she had once imagined, but something more durable, a partnership based on shared work, honest conversation, and growing affection. She had learned to read weather signs and preserve food for winter. He had learned to value her perspective on business decisions and her gift for resolving disputes among the settlement families. "Mrs. Patterson sent word the new schoolteacher arrived," Frank said. "Asked if you'd help organize the welcome celebration." "Of course," Mercy smiled. "It's good to see the settlement growing." As afternoon light slanted through the cabin windows, she reflected on the choice that had brought her here. She had come to the mountains as payment for a debt, but she had remained by her own decision. The difference mattered more than she had initially understood. That evening, as they sat on the cabin porch watching stars emerge above the peaks, Frank reached for her hand. "Happy?" he asked. Mercy squeezed his fingers, feeling the calluses earned through honest work. "Content," she said softly. "That may be better than happiness." The wind through the pines carried the scent of wildflowers and the promise of summer. In the distance, lights twinkled in the settlement windows, marking homes where other couples were building their own versions of partnership and belonging. Mercy had learned that sometimes the best choices were made not in moments of perfect clarity, but in accepting the path that opened before you and walking it with dignity. She had come to the mountains as Mercy Caldwell, bound by others' decisions. She remained as Mercy Thornfield, bound by her own choice to make the best of circumstances and find joy in the unexpected gifts they offered. The courthouse bell in town began to toll the hour, its bronze voice carrying clearly through the mountain air. 10 chimes, marking another day's end and another day's beginning in the endless cycle of seasons and choices that defined mountain life. If something in this story touched you, linger with us. We'll handle the rest.